Well, initially, the idea for the book came from an article that I did on mindfulness, and when I was trying to think of what the perfect example for illustrating mindfulness would be, I flashed back to this vivid recollection from childhood of my dad reading Sherlock Holmes, and especially this scene in A Scandal in Bohemia where Holmes and Watson are talking about the steps, how many steps lead up to 221B Baker Street. Watson doesn't know. And I actually hadn't reread the stories for quite some time. So for this article, I Googled, steps, Sherlock Holmes, and I was just blown away by not only by how well it illustrated mindfulness, but just by the story itself, how well it illustrated psychology more broadly, and just how incredible of a writer Arthur Conan Doyle really was. And then I started rereading the stories, and it was just a gold mine. I think you can, and I think that's what I was really trying to get at in my book. I really agree with that sentiment, and I think that to be a great writer, to be a great anything really, to be great at what you do, you have to be phenomenal at observing the world around you. The Sherlock Holmes, a lot of the methodology that I've outlined in the book is how you go about doing that. It's really about being present and making a conscious effort to engage with the world and to engage with everything around you and to make it a habit to note things. You find, at least I find, that when I'm aware of the fact that I normally am not engaged, and then I normally don't observe and don't listen quite so much, I force myself to do it better. Well, there's a lot that's happening in the brain, and this is a new area in psychology of the mind, and the neuroscience of the mind is mindfulness and what it does to our brains. And researchers have found, I won't go into the nitty-gritty here, but researchers have found that when we meditate, there are actually very profound neural changes that take place. Our brain's default mode network, which is that network of connections that's active when the brain is in its so-called resting state. I say so-called because it's not really resting in its resting state. It's doing a lot, but it just means the state that we're in when we're not really doing anything in particular. Just this baseline readiness, that those connections grow much stronger when we meditate. And also connections to, there's more frontal activity that's reminiscent of more positive emotional states and more approach-oriented states. So it has an emotional impact as well that we can see in the brain, because you can take someone who's experiencing that sort of emotion and you can look at their brain and you can see what happens in the brain of meditators, and there are some really interesting parallels. I've actually written about this exact thing for Scientific American when Alex Stone's book, Fooling Houdini, came out, because Alex Stone talked about a lot of the tricks and was ostracized by a lot of magicians in the magical community for revealing things that they didn't think should be revealed. The beauty of the trick isn't in knowing. In some ways, knowing deepens the beauty because you know, and yet you're still captivated, because a lot of these tricks, and not all, but many of them, are based on fallacies of our mind and of our perception that we have no control over. So for instance, if you know how a cognitive illusion works, you are still going to see that illusion. You can't not see it. That's why they're so incredibly powerful. There are a lot of these psychological, I'll show you a picture, and there's no way you won't see two balls of different colors, even though they're the same color, or there's no way that you won't see one bigger than the other, even if you know it kind of in your mind. So I think the knowledge just makes it all the more fascinating. Wow, I know exactly how this is working, and yet it's still magical, it still captivates me. Knowing the mechanism, in a sense, deepens the beauty, I think. I think that it's the same with everything. I don't agree that there should be quote-unquote secrets in any profession, in the sense that if you understand physics, you have much more appreciation for it. Exactly. If you reread a book, you already know how it's going to end, and yet I think that you often get the most enjoyment out of books upon rereading, because you become free to notice other things that you missed the first time around when you were following the plot. You notice the language, the technique, other things jump out at you. So I don't think knowing the ending or the spoiler, I don't think that matters in any way. Um, I think it depends. I think ultimately it's harder to know ourselves because we're incredibly biased when it comes to ourselves, and it's really hard to see ourselves clearly. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Have a great rest of the day, Maria.
You too.
Bye
Take
bye.
care.